Angus Deayton was one of the most beloved faces on British television since the 1980s, and yet it all came crashing down just as he was really getting started. He's still working but doesn't have the same fame that he once had. Why did this happen? It's due to the scandal that caused his career to decline. It's an affair to remember and one that brings in mixed reactions. Facts First UK presents Angus Deayton speaks out on the affair that ended his career. Gordon Angus Deayton was born January 6, 1956 in Surrey, precisely 1 year after Rowan Atkinson, whom he'd later collaborate with, but we'll get to that in a bit. He didn't come from a show business background, but it seemed that early on he knew that's what he wanted to do. His father was an insurance salesman and his mother a home economics teacher. He showed exceptional talent in football and rugby as a youth, but to him these were just hobbies. When he attended Oxford, he really began to gain experience that would later become his career. He joined the Oxford Review, where he and his classmates would write and perform sketches. Among his classmates were Rowan Atkinson and Richard Curtis. He performed with them at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and helped create the parody singing group the Heebie-Jeebies. This was enough to get him to the attention of the BBC, and after graduating with a degree in French and German, he was ready to bring some good old-fashioned British humor to the masses. His first role was in a radio comedy program called Radioactive. It was a parody of other popular radio programs on the BBC. Later, it was adapted to a TV program called KYTV, which brought him to wider attention. Around this time, he also began working more with Rowan Atkinson in live shows. Often, he played the straight man to the silly characters Atkinson played. Together, the two of them became stars, and Angus became well known as the chap on the park bench who gives Mr. Bean his sandwich after a huge blunder, among the many other characters on the show that he played. Angus was receiving role after role, and he appeared in shows like Blackadder, Who Dares Wins, Saturday Live, Alexi Sale's Stuff, and in the feature film The Tall Guy. But it was his gig as the host of a new satirical show that made him a star. He became the first host of Have I Got News for You?, a biting satirical comedy program that mercilessly took the mickey out of the week's news. Angus served as the dry host, and along with Ian Hislop and Paul Merton, didn't hesitate to mock public figures caught in major scandals. This was the show that made him a star, but also the one that brought him down. Before we get to that, let's discuss his other career highlights. Following Have I Got News for You, Angus was praised for hosting a comic relief special of University Challenge. He also became the first host of the widely successful panel show Would I Lie to You?, until he was eventually replaced by Rob Brydon. Since then, he's appeared in numerous TV programs and films. Most recently, he appeared in an episode of Death in Paradise, released in 2019, and 6 episodes of the sitcom Matchmakers, released in 2021. He's as busy as he's ever been. Apart from his work on television, he's also written 3 books. He's still giving interviews now and then, and his is a name that you don't forget. Angus Deayton is in his late 60s, but still has the same energy he had as a young Oxford student. He's still very much in love with his career and seems to be busier than ever. His work is also getting more versatile, and he's experimenting with drama, comedy, and presenting. He's also giving out hit after hit and has arguably one of the most successful careers of anyone in his generation. So if you didn't know him, you'd think it's been smooth sailing. After all, he's still working. But despite that, he doesn't have the same level of fame and respect he once had. For Angus, his meteoric rise came to a spellbinding fall when the tables were turned, and he became the butt of jokes on Have I Got News for You? The Scandal. On an episode of Have I Got News for You, released in 2002, Angus, still host of the show, suddenly became the main target of the jokes. He had been outed by the British tabloids for being involved in a scandal. He was accused of spending time with prostitutes as well as taking drugs. His co-stars, Ian Hislop and Paul Merton, did not hesitate in mocking him and constantly ridiculing him for the scandal. He continued to be the host for a few more episodes, but behind the scenes, there were discussions on whether it was appropriate for him to remain. After all, the show was meant to mock the public figures most involved in scandals. How could they go on when their very host was such a figure? The decision was made to fire Angus. He became the first and last permanent host of the show. The show's been on for over 20 years and still is popular, but since it's had guest hosts, never another permanent one. The decision to fire Angus was met with both approval and disapproval. While the man who interviewed him at the height of his stardom, Jonathan Ross, called him an idiot on his chat show, the guest, Stephen Fry, expressed sympathy and wished Angus well. In fact, Fry, who had never been on the show before, vowed never to appear on it again. The scandal continued to haunt Angus, and for a while the phone stopped ringing. But as with most scandals, they die down and the show goes on. While he never returned to Have I Got News for You, he managed to continue receiving presenting and acting work and still gets offers today. The downfall and the comeback. Reactions to the firing of Angus are almost more controversial than the affair that ended his career. While some supported it, that some seems to have gotten smaller over the years. Today, many fans and industry colleagues alike look back at Angus's remarkable career and realize that a great man's career was ruined due to a scandal that perhaps was not admirable but wasn't evil, and apart from the alleged drug consumption, wasn't illegal. He seldom discusses it today, and when he does give an interview, he likes to talk about current events and his career today. Rarely does he discuss Have I Got News for You, despite the fact that this was the show that made him. But he does admit that he was at fault, but that it's nobody's business. He feels that time has healed, and he fondly looks back at his other career highlights and acknowledges that he has been given many chances to make a comeback. As time has passed, many of us have stopped caring about the scandal and have begun to admire his work beyond Have I Got News for You. Appreciation is given to his early work with Rowan Atkinson and his later work, particularly with Would I Lie to You. He's also got a newfound appreciation for his serious acting work in television and cinema. It seems that his career hasn't quite ended. While he's more of a working entertainer than a star, it's quite clear that his talent was just too precious to be ignored. Despite being the butt of jokes for a while, he also knew how to dish it out. He's renowned for his wit and his ability to make sarcastic remarks and be dry with his humor. It looks like we haven't seen the last of Angus Deayton, and we probably won't until he decides to stop. His story is one of a great rise, a tragic fall, and a remarkable comeback. Angus Deayton speaks out on the affair that ended his career? Well, not quite. Rather, he's telling us that there's a lot more where that came from. Now it's time to hear from you. Are you a fan of Angus's? What do you think about his dismissal from Have I Got News for You and how his career ended up? Let us know in the comment section below.